Everybody, what's going on? I am Greg Sussman, joined today by Jim Sonis of FanDuel, who's here to help me break down week 2 from a DFS perspective. What's happening, Jim?
It's all good, Greg. Pretty excited to get into week 2. Week 2 is my favorite year of the NFL season. We finally have some data on each of these teams, what they'll look like in their new personnel, with their new coaches, and salaries, and the public may not be fully reacting yet to teams in their new states. So I'm pretty jacked for week 2 in general. How are you doing?
I'm feeling good, man. I am excited to get to week 2 because, as we were saying yesterday, we're not making things up anymore. We're not projecting. We have actual real data to go over, and that's exactly what we're going to use to build our week 2 lineup. So let's begin with one of your favorite stacks of the week, and that takes us to the Los Angeles Rams, where it's going to be Jared Goff to Cooper Kupp all day long, says you. How come it's Kupp and not Cooks or Woods?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is matchup based here because you look at this New Orleans Saints defense, and an area that can be fruitful to attack them from is the slot. And that's exactly where Cooper Kupp will be. And it also helps that Cooper Kupp looked pretty good, looked healthy in week number 1. He had 10 targets in that game. One of those targets was at least 16 yards downfield. So Jared Goff was getting Kupp some looks downfield. So I'm going to use all of Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks, and Cooper Kupp happily. But I think that Kupp makes the most sense to stack Goff if I have just one lineup here. And also, I think that Goff is a pretty logical play this week. Didn't play that well last week. Watching that game, a couple of issues for Jared Goff for sure, but he is a guy who plays really well when he is at home, and he has all 3 of these wide receivers healthy. Last year, that was the case for 4 separate games. And in those 4 games, Goff had 19.4 FanDuel points, 26.6, 39.3 at home against Minnesota, and then 21 points in those 4 games. So he went off, or at least did well from a DFS perspective, in all 4 games, and now does have all 3 of those guys healthy once again. I still have lingering concerns here around this offensive line. Didn't, alleviate those concerns in week 1 by any means, but now they're back at home facing a team that is on short rest. I like this game a whole lot from a DFS perspective. I like to stack both sides. But if I'm making just one lineup and I got to go with one stack, it would be Jared Goff to Cooper Kupp here.
Matchup looks good. It's frustrating. I'm playing Cooper Kupp in a season-long league, but this is what DFS is all about. If I'm going to lose there, I might as well make some money off of it. Jared Goff to Cooper Kupp all day long. We know what that connection is, and it's a connection they didn't have last time these two teams played in the playoffs. I'm sure Sean McVay and the Rams will take advantage of it this Sunday. Another stack you're really into here is buying back in on the Pittsburgh Steelers, where Juju Smith-Schuster no longer has to deal with the bracket coverage of Bill Belichick. Big Ben to Juju seems like a connection worth buying on Sunday.
Yeah, that's the other good thing from week 2 is that we can kind of buy into overreactions from week 1. And if you watch that Steelers game on Sunday night, you're probably not super inclined to use them in DFS in week number 2. But the context here is totally different. That game was on the road against a very good defense that the Patriots have, a defense that is able to take away the opposing team's top option. But now they're facing Seattle, and Seattle has some talent still defensively, but I don't think they'll be able to shut down Juju because last week we saw John Ross go off against them. He was open all the time. Tyler Boyd, a pretty good game there as well. And we saw Cincinnati go heavy with the air attack. And I would expect the Steelers to do the same here. So I think it's a good bounce back spot for Ben Roethlisberger and Juju Smith-Schuster. And again, it's not a bad game from a stacking perspective where I think both sides should be able to score some points. We won't get to see Seattle in their crazy run-heavy approach here because I would expect the Steelers to score some points, which should keep the pace at least a little bit elevated from where it usually is for Seahawks games here. So I like this game overall. Ben Roethlisberger, $7,600. Juju Smith-Schuster is $8,100. I don't think that many people will be inclined to pay that given what happened last week. So count me in here. I think that we're back in on the Steelers, given the different context they have for week 2 and a much better matchup at home.
The matchup is so much better, and I think those that are jumping off the Steelers bandwagon, too much too soon here. Steelers are going to be okay. It's going to be a lot of Juju Smith-Schuster, James Conner, and Big Ben here on Sunday at home against Seattle. I like the matchup as well. Let's move on and get to Kansas City, where you always can honestly stack this team, and now it just depends who you're going to stack Patrick Mahomes with. This week, you're saying, Jim, it's going to be Travis Kelce. Why Kelce over Watkins?
Well, I think because everyone's going to use Sammy Watkins. So if everyone's flocking to Sammy Watkins and flocking to Mecole Hardman, who is super, super cheap on FanDuel, I think it makes sense. I'm going to use those guys as well. But when people go that way, it means they're not going Travis Kelce more often than not. And Kelce actually had sneaky good usage last week, and we know what this dude can do especially in plus matchups against teams like Oakland. Last week, Travis Kelce finished that game with 8 targets. 2 of those were at least 16 yards downfield. 4 of those were in the red zone as well. So 2 touchdown upside, certainly something that Kelce possesses, and he's $8,000. So again, we're probably going to get people shying away from this team. If you use Mecole Hardman, it's actually going to help you afford guys like Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Mahomes, $9,000, and I think that that's really attractive. So I don't mind going with Mahomes, Hardman, and Kelce in the same lineup, because I think this is just such a good spot for this Kansas City Chiefs team with a little bit of usage opened up with Tyreek Hill being out. It also does help that Oakland's offense put up some points in week 1, which means maybe they can keep this Chiefs offense passing a little bit deeper into the game. I'm not expecting Oakland to really give them a good fight in this one, but it doesn't hurt that Oakland was competent in week 1. So I think it's another game you can stack, go at both sides here. My favorite stack for tournaments this week will be going where the public is not and going Patrick Mahomes paired with Travis Kelce.
Mahomes, Kelce, Hardman, all certainly in the mix for you this week in a great spot. Never a bad thing to pile on Chiefs, and I think it's only going to get better. Ed LaShawn McCoy, Damian Williams in there too. A lot of offense coming out of Kansas City this Sunday, and, well, every Sunday. Let's continue on, and let's go right across the river. MetLife Stadium, where the Buffalo Bills will play their second consecutive game, despite, of course, not playing their home games there. It's the Bills and the Giants, and Josh Allen, despite having 4 turnovers last week, still provided a productive fantasy outing. Now, you could start him, and you should start him against the Giants, especially seeing what they allowed to Dak Prescott. But the question is, when you're stacking builds, who you're going to pair Josh Allen up with. What say you, Jim?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same line of thought we had with the Chiefs here, where everyone's going to go at John Brown. And I think they should, because John Brown was awesome last week, and he really aligns well with what Josh Allen does best, which is just launching bombs down the field and seeing what happens. So I'm going to use John Brown once again this week, but Cole Beasley actually got better usage than you may expect last week once you dig in a little bit deeper. He finished that game with 9 targets. One of those targets was deep. He had 81 total air yards in that game, according to airyards.com. And given Beasley's perception and the role we kind of have him in our minds, you wouldn't expect him to get that many downfield looks and that many air yards, but he did in that game against the Jets. And now he's facing the Giants, and they're a team that is exploitable via the slot. And Beasley checks in at $5,000, which is a pretty big discount from John Brown. So I think that that's actually a pretty good spot to go with Cole Beasley, because I mentioned I like Travis Kelce. I like all these expensive wide receivers like Juju Smith-Schuster. I want to spend up at running back again. I've got to find value somewhere, and Cole Beasley gives me that without capping my upside for $5,000. So I think that this is a really good stack for this week. I'm going to have John Brown too, but Cole Beasley is just so cheap. I love him here. I think that Josh Allen, with his rushing upside, which he showed again in week number 1, he was under pressure quite a bit in that game. So we're still going to get some scrambles for Josh Allen. I think that's positive from a fantasy perspective. Josh Allen, $7,500. Beasley is $5,000. If you want to jam in those other studs, I think starting things off with Josh Allen to Cole Beasley should give you the flexibility to do so.
As you said, everybody's going to go toward John Brown this weekend because he does exactly what Josh Allen does well. Just bomb the ball. It's exactly what you said. But when he can't bomb the ball, which he will be able to do against the Giants, he's going to check down. Who's he going to check down to? It's going to be Cole Beasley. A lot to like here when it comes to Josh Allen and the Bills this week. I'm on board. You should be too. Josh Allen, a cheaper option than some of the other players that we've mentioned here. Just $7,500 at the quarterback, and then $5,000 for Cole Beasley. Clearly the Bills, someone you could target cheaply on FanDuel this week. Moving on, we get to the New England Patriots, and I see what you're doing here, Jim. A lot of these undervalued, under-the-radar type of players, right? Sure, maybe Juju and Big Ben don't fit that mold, but Cooper Kupp, a little bit undervalued compared to the other receivers. Same with Cole Beasley versus John Brown. Same with Travis Kelce even over Sammy Watkins. Not necessarily priced, but just a bit unheralded. The same is going to be said in New England, where people are going to gravitate toward Julian Edelman. They're going to gravitate toward James White. But the player that let fantasy owners down the most this past week was Sony Michel, who had like 15 carries and just 18 yards. Well, you're not going away. You're buying all the way in with Sony Michel and the Patriots defense. How come you're continuing the trend here with Sony?
Yeah, I think that discontent with Sony in week one is fully justified, and I echo it because his role in week one sucked. It was terrible. He had just those 15 carries, as you mentioned, and we heard all preseason that Sony Michel was going to be more involved in the passing game, and he promptly got 0 targets and ran just 3 routes. So the passing usage still not there for Sony Michel, but this is a different week. They're on the road in Miami, and the spread here is 18.5 points, which says to me they're probably going to roll in this game. And what do we know about Bill Belichick? He's hard to predict from week to week. He does not go with the same game plan week in and week out. And there's always a chance that this week he decides we're going to pound this thing right down the Dolphins' throat and see what happens here. Because, that inefficiency from Michelle was concerning, especially given that their center David Andrews is out, their right tackle Marcus Cannon is now injured. But I'm not sure they'll have any issues, no matter who's playing offensive line, against this Dolphins team, given how things looked last week. And if Michelle winds up being the workhorse on this team, you're going to want him on your rosters. And I think it makes a lot of sense to pair him with this Patriots defense. An 18.5 point spread should tell you everything you need to know from a defensive perspective for this Patriots team. And they are a team that has pretty heavy road splits defensively, and that's not encouraging. But I don't think any of that matters given how bad the Dolphins look this year. So I am fully on board with going at Sony Michel here. It is very risky, so I would not touch Sony Michel in a cash game because he's not going to get work in the passing game despite those offseason reports. And I think that we can go back to him here and kind of see what happens. Maybe Bill Belichick just doesn't want to show what he's got from an offensive game plan perspective in this game that they probably should win pretty handily. Maybe they just want to run the ball with Sony Michel, get home healthy. I think that there's some narratives you can talk yourself into. So I would not go here in cash games, and I don't think that Michel is worthy of being a core play for tournaments. But if you want to differ things up and try to be a little bit different while going at this Patriots team, I think that Michel gives you a route for doing so, and pairing with the Patriots defense makes a lot of sense.
I don't think it's as crazy as even maybe you're making it out to be, Jim. Like, the one piece of that Patriots offense that didn't work last week was Michel. What's better than a get-right game against the worst team in the NFL in the Dolphins? Sure, Brian Flores is going to know his former team better than most, but they're going to use this game to establish Sony Michel, and they need to get him right because he's a big part of their success and a big part of their future. Yes, Tom Brady will be Tom Brady, and it'll be fun, but I really think a lot of this game plan is going to be to get Sony Michel right and to get him the ball and let him be successful. I expect a big game from Sony Michel. And yeah, you're right. He's not a core play, but I really have no issue starting Michel in my lineups this week. One final stack to get to, and that takes us to San Francisco, where George Kittle had not one but 2 touchdowns taken off the board by penalties. Jimmy G may not be all the way back yet from the injury, but it's clear that Kittle is the most talented pass catcher he has. Dante Pettis battling the injury still. He wasn't right, and neither were any of the other pass catchers other than Kittle. It's the Jimmy G to George K show, and this one makes all too much sense.
Yeah, it's just helpful to know where the ball is going. And we don't have any questions about that in San Francisco. The ball is going to go to George Kittle. He had 10 targets last week. He had 1 deep target, 3 in the red zone, as you mentioned, those 2 overturned by touchdown. And I think that game had like 5 touchdowns overturned by penalty. It was kind of deranged. I think Cam Brate had 2 as well. So a really weird game, which may have allowed us to kind of overlook the San Francisco offense. But I think that this is a good spot to stack this game up. I actually like both sides here because the Bengals are now under Zach Taylor. He, as we know, is a Sean McVay guy, and they threw the ball a ton in week 1. And when you throw the ball a lot, that leads to a lot of play volume. And the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan have always been a pretty fast team. So I think this game is a bit underrated from a stacking perspective. So I want to go at both sides here, get me some Bengals, get me some, John Ross and Tyler Boyd, but then also go at the 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle. The good thing with Garoppolo, too, is that he is just $7,000. That's a really good salary. And again, I need salary relief here. And if you're spending up on tight end, it's probably going to be on Travis Kelce for this week. So I think that it makes Kittle pretty attractive, too, at $7,100. We know where the ball is going in this offense. I expect this game to be decently high scoring. And I think that we can get access to it via Garoppolo, via Kittle. So I'm going at this game overall, but I think my favorite stack within it is going to be Jimmy Garoppolo to George Kittle.
I think this game is a sneaky offensive one. The Bengals showed a propensity to force the ball down the field to John Ross. Tyler Boyd was effective as well, and they put up points against Seattle. I think against San Francisco, this could be a high-scoring affair, and I'm with you. I'm going to get some Bengals in my lineup. Same thing with San Francisco, but You know where the ball is going. With Cincinnati, there's a lot of options. San Francisco, not so much. It's all Jimmy G to George Kittle, and that's half the battle right there. That's going to do it for us here on the FanDuel Hurry Up. Good luck this week. Jim, let's do it again tomorrow.
Looking forward to it. We'll talk some value plays to try to afford all these guys like Juju, Kelsey, all these expensive dudes. We got to get some help there, so we'll talk some values tomorrow to try to sort things out there. Should be a lot of fun. I am looking forward to week 2, Greg. Talk to you tomorrow.
Nothing for nothing. Last week's value plays included Austin Eckler, Chris Carson, Michael Gallup, John Brown. Jim was on his game last Thursday. We'll see if we can do it again this Thursday. Have a great night. We'll see you then.